The holographic display on the Cathar scientific vessel observer floated in front of Dr. Ilara Vance, casting an eerie blue glow across her scaled features. Her four-fingered hands moved with practiced precision through the data streams about Hades 4, the forbidden world that had claimed so many lives across multiple species. As the ship's leading xenobiologist, she had been studying this death trap of a planet for months, though strictly from orbit as per galactic Concord regulations. Biological exclusion zone, Category 5, she murmured, her voice carrying the melodic undertones typical of the Cathar. Highly corrosive atmosphere, predatory flora, extreme weather patterns, and home to the Shadow Stalker. I still don't understand why humans would bring their colony ship anywhere near such a place, said her colleague, Zentor, his elongated head tilting in the Cathar expression of puzzlement. The Argos disappeared over 3 centuries ago, but surely their navigation systems would have identified the hazards. Ilara moved her hands through another set of data. Humans have always been impulsive, less methodical than our kind. It's what makes them fascinating subjects of study. And what gets them killed, Zentor added dryly. A sudden jolt rocked the observer, sending both Cathar stumbling. The ship's lights flickered ominously. Status report. Captain Nerev's voice echoed through the communication system. Unknown spatial distortion detected. The navigation officer responded. Our shields are failing, and another violent shudder cut through the ship, more powerful than the first. Ilara grabbed the edge of her workstation as alarms began blaring. The observer was being pulled downward, toward the very planet they had been cautiously observing. All personnel to escape pods, Captain Nerev ordered, his usually calm voice edged with urgency. This is not a drill. I repeat, all personnel to escape pods. Chaos erupted as the Cathar crew rushed to evacuate. Ilara felt a hand on her arm. Jax, the human engineer who had been assigned to the observer as part of a scientific exchange program. Dr. Vance, we need to go now, he shouted over the alarms. Vorel, the ship's security officer, appeared behind him, his ceremonial Cathar blade contrasting with the high-tech energy weapon at his hip. They barely made it to the nearest escape pod before another shudder, stronger than the others, ripped through the observer. Through the small viewport, Ilara caught a glimpse of the ship breaking apart, debris scattered across the stratosphere of Hades 4. Their descent was a nightmare of turbulence and warning alarms. The pod's heat shields struggled against the corrosive atmosphere, the outer hull temperature rising dangerously. When they finally crashed, it was into a forest of bioluminescent fungi that cushioned their impact somewhat, but immediately began secreting acids that ate at the pod's exterior. Atmosphere filtration systems compromised, the pod's AI announced in its maddeningly calm voice. Emergency oxygen supplies activated. Estimated duration, 16 hours. Vorel was the first to assess their situation. The emergency beacon is damaged. Jax, can you repair it? The human engineer examined the device, his face grim. I'll try, but I can't promise anything. This acid has already corroded several key components. Ilara knew better than most would have awaited them outside. We need to find shelter before nightfall. The bioluminescent cycles of these fungi suggest this region experiences extreme temperature drops after dark, and that's when most of the predatory flora becomes active. They salvaged what supplies they could from the pod and ventured into the alien landscape. The air, even filtered through their emergency masks, carried a metallic tang that burned the lungs. The ground beneath their feet sometimes shifted, revealing carnivorous root systems that Ilara had to identify and warn the others away from. Small flying creatures with translucent wings occasionally darted past, their barbed tails leaving painful welts if they came too close. It was as Jax was attempting to fix the emergency beacon for the 3rd time that Ilara first felt it, the sensation of being watched. She stopped, tilting her head in the Cathar manner of deep listening. Something's tracking us, she whispered. Vorel immediately readied his weapon, scanning the surroundings. Where? I'm not sure. It's... A shadow moved at the edge of the fungal forest, so quickly it might have been a trick of the light. But then it moved again, more deliberately, circling their position. Shadow Stalker. Elara breathed, the words barely audible. Vorel positioned himself between the threat and the others. Stay behind me. The attack came with shocking speed. One moment, the Shadow Stalker was an indistinct blur among the luminescent fungi. The next, it was a nightmarish form of muscle and chitin, lunging at Vorel. The security officer fired his energy weapon with trained precision, but the beast seemed to anticipate each shot, twisting its body in impossible ways to avoid the deadly beams. When it reached Vorel, the struggle was brief and terrible. For all his training and technology, the Cthar security officer might as well have been fighting against a force of nature. The creature moved with an uncanny awareness of Vorel's intentions, evading his blade and counterattacking exactly when his guard dropped. Elara and Jax could only watch in horror as Vorel fell, his weapon clattering uselessly beside him. The Shadow Stalker turned its attention to them, and in the glow of the fungi, Elara could see why it was so feared. Its body was a constantly shifting mass of muscle and armor, adapting to its environment in real time. Its many eyes seemed to process information on multiple spectrums simultaneously, and its movements suggested not just instinct but calculated intelligence. As it prepared to lunge again, Elara knew with scientific certainty why this creature was considered unhuntable across the galaxy, and she knew they were about to die. The piercing sound came from nowhere, a high-frequency pulse that made the Shadow Stalker hesitate, its form rippling with what might have been pain. Another pulse, and the creature backed away slightly. A third, and it retreated into the shadows, though Elara sensed it hadn't gone far. From the direction the sound had come, figures emerged. Humanoid shapes wearing patchwork environmental suits that looked cobbled together from various materials, including what appeared to be the creature's own hide. They moved with a fluid grace that reminded Elara of the Shadow Stalker itself, their steps silent despite the uneven terrain. One of them stepped forward, removing a crude helmet to reveal a young woman's face. Human, but somehow different. Her eyes reflected the bioluminescence with an unnatural intensity, and her movements held a predatory quality that made Elara instinctively uneasy. Well, the woman said in an archaic human dialect that Elara's translator struggled to interpret, "You're either very brave or completely stupid to be out here during Stalker Hour." She extended a hand cautiously. "Aimada, and you'd better come with us if you want to see another sunrise." Elara's scientific horror at Vorel's death was suddenly overshadowed by a deeper, more existential dread and an irresistible curiosity. These were humans, survivors, descendants of the Argo's crew, and they had just casually driven away a creature that had been deemed impossible to hunt by the most advanced species in the galaxy. The journey to the human settlement was a masterclass in survival on Hades IV. Mara led them through terrain that Elara would have declared impassable, identifying threats that were invisible to her scientific eye. The young woman moved with an efficiency that bordered on precognition, sometimes changing direction moments before a hidden danger revealed itself. "How do you know where these traps are?" Jax asked after Mara guided them around a patch of seemingly normal ground that, seconds later, erupted with barbed tentacles. Mara tapped the side of her head. "You learn to see the signs, to feel the patterns. The planet speaks if you know how to listen." She gestured to the crude device that had driven off the Shadow Stalker. "That only buys time. It disrupts their sensory perception, but they adapt quickly. Nothing truly stops the hunters except us." "Hunters?" Elara echoed. "That's what we call them. You outsiders have more dramatic names." She shrugged. Hard to be dramatic about breakfast. Before Elara could process that statement, they crested a ridge, and Forge came into view. The settlement was built into a deep ravine, utilizing the natural defenses of the terrain. Structures of salvaged metal, unmistakably parts of the Argos, were fused with local materials in a functional, if aesthetically jarring, architecture. The air was thick with chemical scents and something organic that Elara couldn't identify, but found disturbing on a primal level. Guards patrolled the perimeter with the same predatory grace as Mara, carrying weapons that appeared to be hybrid designs combining salvage technology with biological components. Children, moving with startling quickness, trained with smaller versions of these weapons under the watchful eyes of adults. "Welcome to Forge," Mara said with a hint of pride. 300 years of survival in hell. They were taken directly to Silas, the leader of Forge. He received them in what might once have been the Argos' command center, now repurposed into a combination of meeting hall and trophy room. The walls were decorated with parts of various Hades creatures. The Shadow Stalker featured prominently. Silas himself was a study in harsh survival. Tall and powerfully built, his body was a map of scars and crude implants. One eye had been replaced with what looked like a modified targeting system. When he moved, it was with the same fluid economy as the other inhabitants of Forge, but with an added weight of authority. "So," he said after Mara had introduced them, "the sky finally gave us back some of its own." His voice was rough, as though damaged by the planet's atmosphere. Thar and human. Interesting combination. "We were on a scientific vessel," Ilera explained. "The Observer. We were studying Hades 4 from orbit when something pulled us down." Silas's artificial I word as it focused on her. "Studying us, you mean? We didn't know you existed," Jax interjected. "The Argos was declared lost over 3 centuries ago." A cold smile appeared on Silas's face. "Yet here we are, thriving where your precious galactic concord feared to tread." He leaned forward. "What I want to know is whether you'll be useful or a burden. We don't have room for burdens in Forge." The interrogation continued for what felt like hours, Silas extracting every piece of information about the Observer, the Cthar, and the current state of human colonies. His interests seemed purely pragmatic, assessing potential threats or opportunities rather than genuine curiosity about the outside world. Finally, he leaned back. "Mara will show you where you can stay. You'll be expected to contribute. Everyone works in Forge." His gaze hardened. "And everyone follows our ways. Remember that." Over the next few days, Ilera observed life in Forge with growing fascination and unease. The entire community operated with a singular focus: the hunting, processing, and consumption of the Shadow Stalker, or Hunter, as they called it. Teams left at regular intervals, armed with their hybrid weapons and moving with that unnerving synchronization. When they returned, they dragged the massive creatures' carcasses to a central processing area. The butchering was performed with practiced efficiency. Muscles and organs were separated, some taken to communal kitchens, others to a specialized facility that Mara called the extraction. There, certain glands, neural tissues, and parts of the brain were processed into an amber-colored, viscous substance. "Nectar," Mara explained when she caught Ilera watching. "The essence of the Hunter." It was during the communal breakfast that Ilera finally understood the full implication of the story's title. The people of Forge consumed both the meat of the Shadow Stalker, prepared in various ways, and small doses of nectar, which they took with a ritualistic reverence. "You eat it," Ilera said, unable to keep the horror from her voice. "The very creature that hunts you." Mara looked at her with a mixture of amusement and pity. "How else do you think we survived? How else could we hunt the Un-Huntable?" She gestured to the others eating around them. "The nectar gives us the edge, the ability to sense, to anticipate, to move as they move. Without it, we'd have died out in the first generation. But the biological implications, the potential for contamination or mutation." "Mutation?" Mara laughed, a harsh sound. "That's precisely the point, Dr. Vance. We changed because we had to. Those who couldn't adapt to the nectar didn't survive." Her expression softened slightly. "It's not without cost, but survival rarely is." As Ilera integrated into the daily routine of Forge, she began to notice the more subtle signs of how the people had changed. Their reflexes were inhumanly fast, their movements conserving energy with predatory efficiency. They displayed a tolerance for the toxic environment that went beyond adaptation, using only crude filtering masks when venturing outside. Most disturbing was the synchronization in working groups. a wordless coordination that suggested a low-level shared consciousness. Meanwhile, Jax had been trying to assess Forge's technology, particularly their communication systems, looking for ways to repair their own beacon or contact potential rescuers. His technical skills had earned him some respect, but Silas kept him under close observation. One evening, when Mara was guiding Alara through the less populated areas of Forge, the xenobiologist decided to press for more information. How did it begin? This consumption of the hunter. Mara was silent for a long moment. The Argos crashed during a hunter migration. The first weeks were a slaughter, nearly 80% dead in the first month. Her voice took on a distant quality. The survivors tried everything: barricades, weapons, traps. Nothing worked. The hunters always knew what we would do before we did it. Then one of our scientists, a woman named Kiera, made what we call the Great Discovery. She noticed that when hunters fed on their prey, they absorbed certain neural patterns. They literally consumed memories, instincts, reactions. She theorized that this was how they anticipated attacks so effectively. So, she suggested you do the same to them. Alara concluded. Mara nodded. The first nectar was crude, toxic. Many died testing it. But those who survived began to sense the hunters, to anticipate them. It was enough to turn the tide. She gestured to the settlement around them. 3 centuries later, here we are. Using her xenobiological expertise and some equipment Jax helped modify, Alara managed to obtain a sample of nectar for analysis. The results confirmed her worst fears: complex, unstable neural compounds interwoven with non-human genetic fragments. The substance was actively altering the neurochemistry of its users, creating pathways that mimic the Shadow Stalker's unique sensory perception. When confronted with these findings, Mara reluctantly described the experience of taking nectar. The immediate sensory enhancement, the temporary mental connection with other users in the hunting party, the echoes of the hunter's intentions they could sometimes perceive. But she also admitted to the side effects: addiction, mood alterations, and occasional loss of control. Some can't handle the change, she said quietly. Their minds fragment. They start thinking more like hunters than humans. What happens to them? Alara asked. Mara's expression closed. We do what's necessary. Later, Alara discovered the disposal area, a secluded section where those who couldn't tolerate nectar or suffered severe side effects were isolated or disappeared. The harsh reality of Forge's survival system became clearer. It was evolve or die, with no room for weakness. Meanwhile, Jax had made a significant discovery. While searching for spare parts in a sealed section of the settlement, he found a locked data compartment from the Argos. Together, they managed to access it, revealing the ship's true nature. It hadn't been a simple colony vessel, but a secret transport carrying samples and equipment for radical genetic research banned by the Concord. They were already experimenting on themselves before the crash, Jax whispered as they reviewed the data. That's why they could adapt so quickly to the nectar. And why the Concord lost track of them, Alara added. The Argos wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this sector. They were running from something. Their investigation didn't go unnoticed. Silas became increasingly suspicious of their activities, especially after catching Jax attempting to access Forge's rudimentary communications array. The engineer was taken away for questioning, returning with fresh bruises and a warning look that kept him silent for days afterward. Alara knew they were in grave danger. She had uncovered the dark truth behind the Hadean survival, a combination of forbidden genetic legacy and the continuous consumption of the Shadow Stalker's essence. They weren't just survivors. They were becoming something else entirely, something that blurred the line between hunter and prey. You'll join tomorrow's hunt, Silas informed Alara a week after their arrival. It wasn't a request. Time you saw how we truly live. Mara was assigned as her protector, though Alara suspected her real role was to ensure the xenobiologist didn't try to escape. The hunting party consisted of 12 Hadeans, each consuming their ritual dose of nectar before departing at dawn. The effects were immediate and disturbing to witness. Their movements became even more fluid, their awareness of each other heightened to an almost telepathic degree. They communicated with subtle gestures and expressions that Alara could barely perceive, let alone interpret. They tracked the shadow stalker through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate, sensing its presence through means Alara couldn't understand. When they finally cornered it in a ravine, the hunt transformed into a dance of death. The Hadeans moved as a single organism, anticipating the creature's every move, using their knowledge of its behavior against it. It was both magnificent and horrifying. Alara saw the power this adaptation had given them, but also the cost, the alien gleam in their focused eyes, the inhuman precision of their movements. They were effective predators, but how much humanity had they sacrificed in the process? The hunt took an unexpected turn when a second shadow stalker appeared, a variant with subtle differences that made it resistant to their sonic disruptors. Chaos erupted as the hunting party scrambled to adjust their tactics. In the confusion, one of the younger hunters, who had taken an extra dose of nectar before the hunt, lost control. His movements became erratic, his eyes wild. He turned on one of his companions, attacking with the same feral intensity they had directed at the shadow stalker. Silas intervened with cold efficiency, subduing the young man with a precision strike to the back of the neck. "Take him back," he ordered two others. "Processing will deal with him." Mara and Alara became separated from the main group during the confusion. As they sought shelter in a small cave, Mara's controlled facade cracked. "It's getting worse," she whispered. "The side effects, the loss of control. Each generation needs more nectar to achieve the same edge, and each generation loses more of themselves to it." She looked at Alara with genuine fear. "Silas thinks the answer is more consumption, more adaptation. He wants us to become the perfect predators, even if it means leaving our humanity behind." Before Alara could respond, a communication came through Mara's crude receiver. An automated drone had detected an unusual signal in orbit, a Cathar vessel. "A rescue ship," Alara breathed. "They must be looking for the observer." The hope died as quickly as it had formed. Silas's voice crackled through the receiver. All hunters returned to forge immediately. "We have visitors. Prepare defense protocols Alpha through Delta." Mara's expression turned grim. He won't let them land peacefully. He'll see them as a threat, or an opportunity to harvest new technology. "They're my people," Alara said, desperation creeping into her voice. "They're just looking for survivors." To Silas, they're no different from the hunters, just another resource to be consumed or eliminated. Mara hesitated, then made a decision. "I can help you get to the communications array, if you can warn them before they enter the atmosphere." Back at Forge, the situation had deteriorated. Silas had ordered full mobilization, treating the Cathar vessel, identified as the Vigilant, as a hostile force. Jax was being held in a secure area, forced to provide information about Cathar ship systems. Silas confronted Alara directly. "Your people are coming. You will help us communicate with them. Direct them to land where we specify." His artificial word as it focused on her. "Your life and the engineers depend on your cooperation." Alara faced an impossible choice. Betray her own people to survive, trust a hunter-changed human in a desperate escape attempt, or find some way to resist that didn't end in death. The Vigilant entered Hades' IV's atmosphere the next morning, following standard Cathar protocol for a potential rescue operation. Captain Telvok, a veteran explorer, maintained communication with Silas, who was using Alara's knowledge, willingly or coerced, to respond in ways that wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. "We detect life signs consistent with Cathar biology." Telvok's voice came through the crude speakers. "Please confirm status of observer survivors." Silas gestured to Alara, the threat in his eyes clear. "This is Dr. Alara Vance," she responded, choosing her words carefully. "We encountered local fauna during our crash. Situation is complex. Recommend extreme caution during approach." She hoped the emphasis on extreme caution would alert Telvok that something was wrong. Cathar communication often relied on subtle vocal cues that humans, even altered ones like Silas, might miss. Captain Telvok's response was measured, Understood, Dr. Vance. We will send a shuttle to assess the situation before committing the Vigilant to landing operations. Silas smiled coldly. Perfect. They're following the script. He turned to his hunters. Positions as planned. Remember, disable if possible. We want their technology intact. What followed was a grim showcase of the Hadeans' abilities. Using their knowledge of the terrain, their nectar-enhanced perception, and their brutal, efficient tactics, they ambushed the Cathar shuttle as it landed in the designated clearing. The Cathar were armed with the latest energy weapons, protected by advanced shields, and trained in tactical operations. None of it mattered. The Hadeans moved like shadows, anticipating every defensive measure, using biological weapons derived from the Shadow Stalker that confused the Cathar sensors and paralyzed their nervous systems. Alara watched in horror as her people fell to creatures that had once been human but now hunted with the same terrifying efficiency as the Shadow Stalker itself. The expressions on the Cathar officers' faces as they realized what they were fighting, not aliens but humans who moved like apex predators, would haunt her forever. In the chaos, Mara appeared at Alara's side. Now's our chance. I've freed Jax. If we can reach the communications array on the north side, you can warn the main ship. They fled through service tunnels Mara had used since childhood, avoiding the guards Silas had posted. Jax was waiting for them, his face bruised but his eyes determined. I sabotaged part of their defense grid, he said. It won't last long, but it might give us an opening. The communications array was primitive but functional, a hybrid of Argo's technology and adaptations made over centuries. Jax worked frantically to align it with Cathar frequencies while Mara kept watch. Captain Telvok, Alara broadcast when the connection was established. This is Dr. Alara Vance with an emergency warning. Do not send additional shuttles. The settlement is hostile, with capabilities beyond standard human parameters. They have adapted to hunt the Shadow Stalker and will. A shock baton struck her from behind, sending her sprawling. Silas stood over her, his face a mask of cold fury. I gave you a chance, he said. I offered survival. Mara lunged at him, moving with the speed and precision of a true hunter. But Silas was faster still, countering her attack with practiced ease. You disappoint me, Mara, he said as he knocked her down. I thought you understood what was necessary for our survival. Becoming monsters isn't survival, she spat back. It's extinction of everything human. The confrontation was interrupted by an explosion that rocked the entire settlement. The Vigilant had launched an orbital strike at the defense systems Jax had identified. In the confusion, Alara managed to complete her warning. They've consumed the Shadow Stalker's essence. They can anticipate your tactics. Standard protocols will fail. Retreat and quarantine this planet immediately. The transmission cut off as Silas destroyed the array, but enough had gotten through. The Vigilant launched no more shuttles. Instead, it maintained orbit, establishing a blockade. The following days were tense. Silas had suffered a significant setback. The Cathar weren't going to be easy prey after all, but he still held Alara, Jax, and now Mara as prisoners. The Vigilant couldn't risk a direct confrontation, but it also couldn't leave, knowing what the Hadeans represented. Humans who had transformed themselves into something potentially more dangerous than the Shadow Stalker itself. In captivity, Alara made a final, desperate decision. To understand her enemy completely, to find any weakness that might help the Cathar, she would need to experience Nectar firsthand. Mara was horrified. You don't know what you're asking. It changes you permanently. The neural pathways it forms don't just disappear. I need to understand, Alara insisted. My people need to know exactly what they're facing. With reluctant help from Mara, who believed this might be their only chance, Alara consumed a small dose of nectar. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. Her senses expanded beyond anything she had ever experienced, perceiving spectrums of light, vibrations, and chemical signatures previously invisible to her. But more disturbing was the mental shift, the predatory awareness that suddenly categorized everything around her as either threat or prey, the echoing presence of other minds connected by the same substance. And beneath it all, something alien and ancient that she recognized instinctively as the essence of the Shadow Stalker itself. Through this altered perception, she finally understood what had happened to the people of Forge. They hadn't just adapted to survive Hades 4. They had been gradually possessed by the very creature they hunted, their humanity diluted with each generation until they were becoming a hybrid species, part human, part Shadow Stalker, with the worst predatory instincts of both. And she saw Silas's true plan. He didn't just want to defend Forge, he wanted to expand. With Cthar technology, they could eventually leave Hades 4, spreading their adaptation to other worlds. The galaxy would face a new kind of predator, one with human intelligence and Shadow Stalker hunting abilities. When Anector's effects began to fade, leaving her nauseous and disoriented, Elara knew what had to be done. Using her xenobiological knowledge, she worked with Mara and Jax to create a plan. The central processing facility, where nectar was extracted and refined, was the heart of Forge. It was also its vulnerability. If they could contaminate the nectar supply with a compound that would neutralize its effects, the Hadeans would lose their edge, becoming vulnerable not just to outside forces, but to the Shadow Stalkers themselves. It was a brutal solution, potentially condemning many to death. But the alternative was worse, allowing what humans had become on Hades 4 to spread beyond its boundaries. Their sabotage was partially successful. They managed to contaminate a significant portion of the nectar supply before being discovered. The resulting chaos as hunters began losing their abilities created the distraction needed for the Vigilant to launch a targeted extraction operation, rescuing Elara, Jax, and a few others who wished to leave. But Forge survived. Silas, wounded but alive, rallied his remaining forces. They had lost much of their advantage, but they still had generations of adaptation and knowledge of how to survive on Hades 4. As the Vigilant prepared to break orbit, Elara looked down at the hostile planet that had changed her understanding of adaptation and survival. The Cthar had already transmitted her findings to the Galactic Concord, which was preparing a permanent quarantine fleet for Hades 4. No. One in, no one out. On the observation deck, she felt a lingering echo of the Shadow Stalker's awareness, a permanent reminder of her brief exposure to nectar. It would fade with time, but never completely disappear. Part of the beast would always be with her, just as it had become part of the humans of Forge. Down on Hades 4, life continued. In the communal hall of Forge, Silas surveyed the remains of their once great settlement. They had lost much, but they would rebuild. They would adapt. They always had. At the central table, the morning meal was being prepared as it had been for generations. Meat from the Shadow Stalker, served simply but efficiently. There were fewer portions of nectar now, carefully rationed until new supplies could be processed, but they would recover that too. After all, on Hades 4, the breakfast bell was ringing. And today's menu featured some interesting new additions.